And here we do have our full presidential powers, and these are the ones that are from the Constitution regarding both legislative, national power, administrative powers, everything. So, and just looking at this, national security powers, remember you do have that reference of the guide between the diplomacy but foreign with the congressional to executive checks, which is going to be very helpful for you, but they're just kind of listed here. So, of course, commander in chief, armed forces, but the Senate has to declare war. Making treaties, nominating ambassadors. Those are presidential powers with the Senate on the other end. And then, of course, head of state, receiving ambassadors, which definitely the recognition of other nations does improve relationships. Legislative powers, they're the chief legislators. So, to begin with, they are in control of the State of the Union. Suggestions to Congress on what laws should be. Those are two powers that are often overlooked where it's really just a speech type thing, but that is from the Constitution giving them that right to do so. Now, the veto, the signing, those are kind of they're separate, but it's the same end. You either sign it or you veto it. Both are from the Constitution. Now, this one again is the big power. Take care that laws be faithfully executed. That is the one that stretches the powers of the president, where it's not just those that are clearly listed, it goes well beyond that. And then the judicial powers that you can see, those are the ones that we sort of just addressed in class, the reprieves, pardons for the federal crimes. And it's not exactly something that you would see impact much, but Nixon is one who was pardoned by President Ford, where there were going to be charges against him, and he was pardoned for those crimes. But then the one with judicial power that is more important, nominating federal judges, and that is Supreme Court justices, one of which was just nominated. But then also many other judges from around the country to fill federal judgeships, which we'll see in a couple chapters. So now the real connections to the president, the White House office, for how the president goes about their business, their decisions, their speeches, their actions, everything. And it really does come from the White House office staff. This is the closest group of people to the president. They are the closest ascendantes. Most of the people that you'll see here are working because they were connected to Donald Trump on his campaign. So Conway, Spicer, they all Bannon were all connected to Trump on his campaign. So it's kind of like the close personal assistants, those who helped you along the way. And they do not have to go through the Senate confirmation process. They're on their own. They're just appointed but because they're handpicked. They are not a member of the cabinets, the government agencies. They're a part of the White House office staff. So a big difference there. And they do not have to go through the confirmation process. Now, just the general structures that are talked about within the book and the chapter, and they all have different weaknesses really for how the president will go about listening to different inputs and different suggestions on what course of action they should take with any given piece of legislation or any issue that's in front of them. The first is the pyramid structures, where really it's just kind of so everybody has an opinion and it reports up to their leader. Then that level of leaders, they all have their opinions, and then they report to their leader. So it's kind of a pyramid. You just report up, best idea continues, best idea continues, best idea continues, and you hope that yours makes it through the bracket and gets to the president. Well, that is where the chief of staff listens to the people underneath to get the best piece of information. But that cuts out the source of the input, which can lead to misinformation. The president might not get all the pieces that were there for how a given policy should be carried out. The circular structure is basically just a free-for-all. I want to listen to everybody. I want to listen to my assistants. I want to listen to my staffers. I want to listen to my cabinet heads, everything. This is good because you are allowing for input, but then at the same time, you're going to get confused. That's just a lot of information. So you're going to get confused. People are going to be in competition with one another, and it can lead to a decision being made that isn't fully thought out. Ad hoc is kind of the last option. That's just kind of thrown together. It's okay, I want this, and this person together. Boom, you're the committee that I'm putting together on education, policy, and what really should go into school lunches. And if that happens, then because it was handpicked by a president, who might be the expert? somebody might be the expert that isn't actually a part of that informal committee, and therefore they might be cut out of the discussion when really they could have been a lot of input, a good resource. So these three aren't really, this or that or this or that for a president. Usually it's a combination of them. Jimmy Carter was really big on circular just because he wanted to include everybody, but most presidents use some combination of all of them, where maybe on certain issues they are more circular, open to everybody's input, but maybe on others they're more pyramid structure, probably national security and that sort of stuff. But to be a part of the White House office staff, you have to be connected to the president, and they are the ones who have the biggest impact on what presidents are going to do. So President Trump's decisions are in large part due to the people that surround him. In fact, actually, with Donald Trump and recently criticisms of this, Steve Bannon here has been criticized for being the one who has actually made decisions, and Donald Trump took offense to that and tweeted that he makes his own decisions. And that shows you that people do recognize that the staff is very involved in the decisions that Trump's making. And people do have a problem with that because these people are not confirmed by the Senate. So it's basically the hand-picked advisors of the president, and then there's no check on them being involved in what Trump does. So going on to people who, though, could be approved by the Senate, and that is one right here, the Office of Management and Budget. But all of these fall under the category of the executive office of the president. So you can kind of think of this as like the executive office, this umbrella of people. So at the top you have the president, and then who are the different people that are going to help them on a regular basis? The White House office staff is up there, but they're just the assistants. So they're under the umbrella. President Trump is going to go to them more regular than anybody else, but they also are not an agency. They aren't a government agency where they would have to be approved. The OMB, though, does, the Office of Management and Budget. So to begin, I think you know that it has to deal with budget. So they are in charge of helping the president develop their budget originally and giving suggestions to Congress so they can continue have that back and forth discussion for how they want to evaluate their policies and what impact the budget will have on them. But then they also deal with the government agencies where they investigate the different proposals from government agencies. So they do have a bigger role than just the budget. Then there are other independent agencies that are connected to the president where they're regulatory commissions that carry out like the business activity. So National Security Council is one, Council of Economic Advisors, and they all help the president with what they're really doing. They're a little bit more specialized than just the staff, but they still have input on different situations. The cabinet is another big section of the executive office of the president because, going back to this umbrella quickly, they're also going to be somebody that the president looks to for support. You know, if they're going back here even to the different structures, they're going to listen to the Secretary of Defense on defense strategy. Well, that's because they're part of the cabinet. There are 15 different executive departments, and they were established originally. There were 4, and then they just kind of grow with need. They grow with need. The most recent being the Department of Homeland Security, and that was the direct result of 9/11, but they continue to grow with need, and with each one, they have more specialization. So there are 15. Most of them are secretaries. We are currently in the confirmation process. Jeff Sessions was just approved as Attorney General. That is the only one that doesn't have a secretary name. Really, does that matter? No, doesn't. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, was just approved by the Senate as well. So they head the different departments. The difference here, though, is that these are not exactly people that that Trump is connected to. They might have some connection, but unlike the staffers, the direct connections, people who run the executive departments, the cabinet heads, in other words, so the 14 secretaries and the Attorney General, are there more so because they have a little bit of expertise. They aren't typically politicians, but they do work with the government often. So, you could think of just quick, like what Betsy DeVos's background is. She has been affiliated with education reform, and her government experience is limited, but she has some government experiences. So they try to keep people away from the political arena, and they are able to focus on their specific task. Where she's had Republican connections with her husband running for governor. She's played an active role in the Michigan Republican Party, but she's not a politician. Government experience doesn't necessarily mean that she's a politician. Now, of course, this is different than Parliament. They are separate. They are not a part of the legislature. They are specialized in their area because the members of the legislature will often give them authority to make decisions in their specific area, like any of these: education, the energy, the labor, the agriculture. So the people who work for these agencies are going to be specialized in them. The cabinet heads, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Ed, they are going to focus on this specific thing, whereas a member of Congress is going to have to focus on all of them. Now, all of these 15, we're going to talk a lot about them in the bureaucracy chapter coming up next. But for now, these are all a part of the executive office of the president. And this is really where the government agencies begin. And you can see, just for reference here, for the line of succession, that's the 25th Amendment, remember, which is the vice president, then the Speaker of the House, then the president pro tempore, and then all of the cabinet heads by order of creation. So that means that boom, 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 you work your way down, and that would be the last person in line to be president currently. Okay, so here is your graphic of what I was talking about with the executive office, and the whole focus is to try to run things effectively. So some of them are more important than others, but they are all specialized with what they focus on. So depending on the different area, the different purpose, the different policy, whatever, it's going to be a different group that often gets more of an input. So the National Security Council, they are going to deal with national security. The Council of Economic Advisors, the economy, Office of Management Budget, the budget, and then also the way that different agencies are working. So what else do they do? Well, the presidents see them first. They probably see them last at night. They're the ones who give the most pertinent information to the president, and that is why they have a big influence on them, because they could prevent them from receiving information, but then they also could give them extra information that maybe would sway them in a certain direction for how they're going to go about their business. Now, the First Lady is a little bit different, where they have actually an office, it's kind of like the White House office staff. They have a staff also for the First Lady. But the First Lady doesn't really have a role in government other than they get to be kind of the figurehead of a specific issue. So for Michelle Obama, it was childhood obesity, the school lunches. Then you can think, Nancy Reagan was the war on drugs and the Just Say No campaign. So it'll be interesting to see if the First Lady is going to select a single issue that she chooses to focus on, or if maybe she's just going to be more of an overall support for different policies that Donald Trump is pursuing. And, it'd be kind of a general input and then trying to convince people or promote or get support in that way. And that, again, really, if you have to think about what that could do for a president, is if the First Lady has an objective, has a mission that is effective, then that could also improve in the approval rating of the president. So again, this is not a history lesson, but I think each president has done different things, and each president tends to try to implement their own policies, their own reorganization. Basically, if you kind of were to break all these down, they're all different and they all did different things for how they viewed the presidency. And really that comes into an interpretation of what the Constitution allows them to do. So Eisenhower was a military general. That's how they're going to rule. Then you have Kennedy. that was more charisma, the persuasion. That's why he was a little bit of favored person in the White House, because of his charisma. Then you kind of get down here with Johnson and Nixon and Ford, and they're the ones who really started to change the way that the presidency operated. But then you get Carter, who was the outsider, the Washington outsider, seeking to see change, which is a little bit of how kind of Trump had so much appeal, is that he was an outsider. He's going to drain the swamp and get rid of those lifelong politicians and change the way people thought about politics in D.C. by not being somebody who was connected to all the other nuances of how government operates.